Wyatt Bellamy didn't say a word when he saw her. He just stopped walking right there in the middle of the saloon doorway and watched the tears roll down her face while she sat alone at that corner table, hands folded in her lap like she was already practicing how to be somebody's property. Something locked tight in his chest cracked open. He'd ridden 500 miles to reach Alder Creek. He hadn't planned to stay. But a man doesn't watch a woman cry like that and just turn around and leave. Not a real one. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel and drop your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this tale travels. The summer of 1878 came to Montana territory hard and fast, the way it always did. No warning, no mercy, just heat pressing down on the mountains like a hand flat against a stove. Alder Creek sat tucked between two ridgelines, the kind of town that didn't appear on most maps and probably preferred it that way. One main road of packed dirt, a handful of buildings that leaned against each other like old men tired of standing, and a population that had learned long ago that minding your own business was the only religion worth practicing. Wyatt Bellamy rode in just past 4 in the afternoon. He wasn't much to look at from a distance. Just another man on a dark horse trail, dust on his shoulders, hat pulled low. But up close you noticed things. The width of him. The way his jaw was set. The fact that his eyes, pale gray and steady, moved over everything, in a town the way a man's eyes move when he's spent too many years somewhere that wanted him dead. He tied his horse at the post outside Calloway's saloon, rolled the stiffness out of his right shoulder, a habit from an old wound, and pushed through the door. The place smelled like sawdust and spilled whiskey, and something underneath both of those that Wyatt couldn't name but recognized. Desperation had a smell. He'd learned that the hard way. He crossed to the bar, set 2 coins down without being asked, and waited for the barkeep to fill a glass. He wasn't thirsty, not really. But a man sitting at a bar with a drink was invisible. A man standing in a doorway with nothing in his hands was a threat. Wyatt had learned that too. He was halfway through the glass when he saw her. She was sitting at the corner table by herself, and she wasn't hiding the fact that she'd been crying. She wasn't performing it either. She was just sitting there with it red around the eyes, jaw-tight hands flat on the table, like she was trying to press herself down into the wood so she wouldn't fly apart. A cup of coffee in front of her that she hadn't touched. She was young. Not a girl, but young. Dark hair pinned up in a way that had come half undone. A dress that was clean, but too formal for midday in a saloon, the kind of dress you put on when somebody tells you to look presentable. Wyatt didn't stare. He looked once, then looked away, then looked back again, because something about the way she was sitting wouldn't let him go. She wasn't afraid. That was the thing. A woman alone in a frontier saloon crying would usually be frightened, hunched, guarded, watching the door. This woman wasn't watching anything. She had the look of someone who had already accepted a terrible thing and was now just waiting for it to happen. Wyatt had seen that look before. On men lined up before a firing squad. On horses at a slaughterhouse gate. He didn't like it on her. He finished his drink slowly, set the glass down easy, and made no sudden movements. Then he picked up his hat, crossed the room without rushing, and stopped at her table. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up. Her eyes were dark brown, nearly black, and they assessed him in about 2 seconds flat, with a sharpness that told him she wasn't soft whatever else she was. "This table's taken," she said. "I don't see anyone." "You will." She looked back at her coffee. "In about an hour." Wyatt pulled out the chair across from her and sat down anyway. She looked up again, sharper this time. "I said, I heard you." He set his hat on the table between them. "I'll be gone before your hour's up. I just want to sit somewhere that ain't the bar." She studied him. He let her. "You just ride in?" she asked finally. "This afternoon? Passing through?" That was the plan. She made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Plans don't last long in Alder Creek. So I'm gathering." A silence settled between them that wasn't exactly comfortable, but wasn't hostile either. Wyatt signaled to the barkeep for 2 coffees. She watched him do it and didn't object. "I'm Wyatt Bellamy," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Eva Storm." "Miss Storm." "Don't." Her voice was flat. "Don't do that. Don't be polite at me. I can't take it right now." Wyatt nodded once. Understood that kind of thing. There were days when someone's basic decency could break you open in ways cruelty couldn't. The barkeep brought 2 cups. She wrapped both hands around hers, but still didn't drink. "You want to tell me what's happening in an hour?" Wyatt asked. "No?" "All right." Another silence. Outside, a wagon rolled past. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking at something that didn't care. "My father made an arrangement," Eva said without looking at him. She said it like the words had been sitting in her throat long enough that she was tired of holding them. "With Charles Ward. You know who that is. Never been to Alder Creek before today. Ward owns everything worth owning in this valley. Landwater writes the mill half the men who work them." She paused. "He wanted my father's property on the North Ridge. My father didn't have it to give. He had debts instead." Wyatt was quiet. "So he gave Ward something else," Eva said. "He gave Ward me." The words landed in the space between them and stayed there. Wyatt kept his face even. He'd taught himself that over many years, keeping the outside still while the inside went to war. "Marriage arrangement." "Yes." She finally picked up the cup, set it back down without drinking. "Ceremonies tomorrow morning. You agreed to it." She looked at him then directly with something that wasn't anger, but was close enough to its cousin to be uncomfortable. "Does it matter?" He held her gaze. "It matters. My father signed the papers 2 weeks ago." Her voice didn't waver, but it cost her something not to let it. "Ward's already moved 2 of his men onto the property, one sleeping in my bedroom. I've been staying at Mrs. Holt's boarding house since Tuesday." She set the cup down too hard. It rattled in the saucer. "Does that answer your question, Mr. Bellamy?" "Wyatt," he said quietly. She blinked. "Just Wyatt." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes that she locked back up quickly. "What does it matter to you?" she asked. "You don't know me. You rode in an hour ago." "That's true." "Then why are you sitting at my table asking questions?" Wyatt thought about that. He was an honest man, if nothing else. He'd given up pretending otherwise sometime around his 28th birthday after a series of events that had made lying feel like too much extra weight to carry. "Because you were crying," he said, "and you weren't embarrassed about it. Most people hide it. You didn't. That told me something." "What did it tell you?" "That you're not broken yet, but you're close." The room got very quiet around them. Eva Storm looked at him the way you look at something you don't quite know how to classify, not dangerous, not safe, somewhere in the unmarked territory between. Then she said, "Ward's going to be here at 5 o'clock to go over the final arrangements. He doesn't know how I feel about this." "He doesn't care," Wyatt said. It wasn't a question. "No," she agreed, soft and certain. "He doesn't care." The door to the saloon opened. 3 men walked in, and Wyatt felt the whole room shift the way a herd shifts when a predator steps into the field. Not panic, just awareness, reorganization. The man in front was tall, heavy through the shoulders, wearing a suit that was too fine for a frontier town, and wearing it like a weapon. He had gray at his temples, and the kind of face that was handsome in the way that money sometimes makes. A face handsome, confident, smooth, untested. Behind him, 2 men who were clearly not there to drink. Eva's back went rigid the moment he walked in. She didn't turn around. She'd heard the door. Charles Ward's eyes found her immediately. Then they found Wyatt sitting across from her, and they narrowed by about 1/4 of an inch the controlled anger of a man who has trained himself never to show the full thing in public. He crossed the room. His boots were expensive. Even the sound of them was expensive. "Eva?" He didn't say her last name, didn't say Miss. Just Eva, like he already owned her. He looked at Wyatt. "And who's this?" Wyatt didn't stand up. He picked up his coffee, drank from it, set it down, and then looked at Ward with those pale gray eyes that didn't have a single apology in them. "Wyatt Bellamy," he said, "just passing through." "This is a private conversation," Ward said. He wasn't talking to Wyatt. He was talking to the air in front of Wyatt's face, the way powerful men talk to things they've already decided are irrelevant. "Don't look private to me," Wyatt said. "Looks like a saloon. Open to the public, best I can tell." One of the men behind Ward moved slightly. Wyatt tracked it without moving his head. Ward put his attention back on Eva. "I told you I'd be here at 5. It's 5. He pulled out the chair beside her, not across from her, beside her, and sat without being invited. Territorial. Deliberate. "We need to go over the seating at tomorrow's ceremony. Reverend Holt wants the details finalized tonight." Eva's hands were flat on the table again. That pressing down motion, like she was trying to anchor herself. "I'll be there," she said. Her voice was steady. Wyatt noticed what it cost her. "You'll be there now," Ward said pleasantly. "We're going to Holt's house." "I'd like to finish my coffee." Ward looked at the untouched cup. "You haven't touched it." "I'd like to finish it." Something moved through Ward's expression. Impatience, displeasure, and then smoothed back out. He was good at the smoothing out. It was the most dangerous thing about him, Wyatt thought. Men who lost their tempers were predictable. Men who kept it were not. Ward looked at Wyatt again. "I don't recall seeing you in Alder Creek before." "Rode in today." "What's your business here?" "Personal." "Personal." Ward repeated the word the way you repeat something a child has said that you find mildly amusing. "We're a small community, Mr. Bellamy. Personal business tends to become community business." "I find the opposite is usually true," Wyatt said. "Personal business stays personal when people mind their own." The two men behind Ward went very still. Eva was looking at Wyatt now. He could feel it without looking at her, a kind of heat at the edge of his vision. Ward held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he smiled, and it was a real smile which was somehow worse than if it hadn't been. "Enjoy your coffee, Mr. Bellamy. Alder Creek is a hospitable town." He stood, placed his hand on Eva's shoulder. His fingers spread wide, proprietary, and said, "Eva, let's go." She looked at his hand on her shoulder. Then she looked at Wyatt. He didn't tell her what to do. Wasn't his place. He just looked back at her and kept his face open and still and let her make her own decision. She stood up. She didn't shake Ward's hand off. She just stood in a way that meant it fell naturally without conflict. And then she stepped slightly forward, so it was no longer anywhere near her. Small victories. Wyatt recognized them. She picked up her bag from the back of the chair. She was going to walk out of here and go plan the ceremony that would end her. He could see it happening, and had no authority to stop it, and no right to, and he knew it. She paused at his side of the table, didn't look at him directly. "Thank you for the coffee," she said, quiet enough that Ward, who had already started for the door, didn't catch it. "Didn't do much," Wyatt said. "You sat down," she said. "That was something." And then she walked out. Wyatt sat in that saloon for another hour. He had another cup of coffee he didn't want. He thought about the road north, which was what he'd come to take. He thought about the job waiting in Billings, which was what he'd come to do. He thought about Eva Storm's hands pressing flat against the table like she was holding herself together by sheer force of will. He asked the barkeep carefully without seeming too interested about Charles Ward. What he learned over the next 30 minutes was worse than he'd assumed, and he'd assumed plenty. Ward had come to the valley 6 years ago with outside money, and a lawyer who knew how to read a contract in ways that frontier settlers didn't. He'd bought land cheap from families who didn't understand what they were signing. When families couldn't be bought, he'd found other ways to move them. Water rights cut off credit at the mill. Withdrawn the kind of pressure that didn't leave visible marks, but broke things just the same. 3 families had lost property in the last 2 years alone. 2 of them had simply left the territory. Eva's father, a man named Daniel Storm, had taken a loan from Ward's lending operation 3 winters back when the cattle died in a freeze. The interest terms were written in language that meant the debt could never realistically be paid back. Ward had known that when he wrote them. He'd been waiting for the property on the North Ridge since the day he'd handed over the money. The girl had just been efficient, a way to clean it all up, secure the land and the lineage at the same time. Wyatt finished his coffee. He put some coins on the bar. He nodded to the barkeep and walked outside into the late summer heat. He stood on the boardwalk for a long moment. His horse stamped once behind him, impatient. North Road was right there. 3 days to Billings. Clean, simple paid work. He turned left instead. The boarding house was a 2-story building at the end of the main street, white paint going gray flower boxes in the windows, with the summer blooms still hanging on. He asked for Mrs. Holt at the front and was told she was at the Reverend's house and wouldn't be back until evening. He didn't ask for Eva. He wasn't sure he had the right. He took a room for the night instead. 3rd floor window facing the street. He set his rifle against the wall, sat on the edge of the bed, and tried to reason himself out of what he already knew he was going to do. He was a practical man. He'd spent 12 years doing hard work for varying amounts of pay in places that didn't want him. He'd learned early that sentiment got a man killed, and attachment was a luxury for men with a place to go home to. He had no place to go home to. He also had a persistent and inconvenient conscience that he'd never quite managed to strangle all the way through, no matter how many times he'd tried. Tomorrow morning, Eva Storm was going to stand in front of a reverend and say words that would sign her life over to a man who saw her as an asset. She'd do it because her father had decided her worth was equal to a bad debt. She'd do it because in 1878, in a Montana frontier town, there wasn't a court in the territory that would say any different. She'd do it with her hands pressed flat against her sides, holding herself together. He was still sitting on the edge of the bed thinking about all of this when someone knocked on his door. He was across the room with his hand near the rifle before the knock finished. "Mr. Bellamy." A woman's voice, low. "It's Eva Storm." He opened the door. She was still in the dress from the saloon. Her hair had come fully undone now, dark and loose around her shoulders, and she was holding something in an envelope thick with papers, and her expression was the most composed he'd seen it, which worried him more than the crying had. Composed people had made decisions. "How did you know which room?" he asked. "Mrs. Holt's granddaughter works the front desk. She's 14 and tells me everything." She held out the envelope. "I want you to look at something." He stepped back. She came in, which in 1878 in a frontier town was already a declaration of some kind, and she seemed to know it, and she didn't care. She laid the envelope on the small table by the window and spread the papers out. He came to stand beside her. "This is the loan agreement," she said, pointing, "and this is the deed transfer my father signed. And this," she set down a third document, "is what Ward had my father sign 2 weeks ago when the arrangement was finalized." Wyatt looked at the papers. He was no lawyer, but he'd spent enough years on the wrong end of legal documents to know how to read them. He read them. Then he read them again. "Eva," he said slowly. "The date," she said. "Look at the date on the deed transfer." He looked. "My father signed this in January," she said. "Ward told him it was a mortgage extension. His lawyer, Ward's lawyer, explained it to him as a mortgage extension." "It's not a mortgage extension," Wyatt said. "No." Her voice was absolutely steady. "It's a full title transfer. My father signed away the North Ridge property in January. He doesn't know. He thinks he's still negotiating." She gathered the papers carefully. "Which means Ward already owns the land. He doesn't need this marriage to secure the property. He never did." Wyatt looked at her. "He just wants me," she said, flat, like stating weather. "The marriage isn't about the land anymore. Maybe it never was. He wants to own something that walks and talks back. The room went quiet around that. Wyatt folded his hands on the table and looked at the papers and thought about all of the things a man with connections and money and no principle whatsoever could do to a woman who knew too much about his business practices. "If your father knew," Wyatt said carefully, "what would he do?" Eva's jaw tightened. "He'd be devastated. He's a proud man who made desperate choices. He believes Ward is doing him a kindness." She paused. "He won't hear otherwise from me." "Would he hear it from a judge?" She looked at him sharply. "What kind of judge?" "Federal Land Office has a circuit judge comes through Billings every 6 weeks," Wyatt said. "I was headed that direction. I know people who know people." He straightened. "Deed transfer signed under false pretense witnessed by a lawyer employed by the opposing party, that's not a nothing case. Especially not to a federal man who's got no stake in local politics." Eva was very still. "It won't happen before tomorrow morning," Wyatt said. He didn't soften that. Wasn't the kind of man who added cushion to hard truths. "But if you can find a reason to delay the ceremony, any reason, I can have a man in Billings contacted inside of 3 days." "And in the meantime?" she asked. "In the meantime," he said, "you stay out of Ward's reach as much as you can, and I stay in Alder Creek." She looked at him for a long moment. The window behind him was going gold with the last of the evening light. "Why?" she asked. He'd known she was going to ask that. He'd been trying to figure out the answer since he'd turned left instead of right outside the saloon. "Because it's the right thing," he said finally. She waited like she knew there was more. "And because—" He stopped, started again. "Because I watched you sit in that saloon and hold yourself together with nothing but your 2 hands, and not one person in that room did a single thing about it." He met her eyes. "I got tired of watching." Eva Storm looked at him for a long time in the fading summer light of a rented room in a town he'd never planned to stay in. Then she picked up the papers, folded them carefully, and put them back in the envelope. 3 days, she said. Maybe 4. I can delay the ceremony by 2 days at most. Headache illness ward will accept that much without pushing. Any longer, and he'll know something's wrong. 2 days might be enough to get a message through. Might, she repeated. Best I can offer, he said honestly. She looked at him one more time. Something in her face had shifted. Not hope exactly. He didn't think she could afford hope yet, but something like the decision to not give up quite yet. Good night, Mr. Bellamy, she said. Wyatt, he said. She almost smiled. Almost. Good night, Wyatt. She left. The door closed quietly behind her. Wyatt stood at the window and looked down at the street below, where the last of the summer light was being slowly swallowed by the mountains on the western ridge. Tomorrow was going to be complicated. He'd been through complicated before. He pulled out paper from his saddlebag, uncapped his ink, and started writing a letter to a man in Billings who owed him a considerable favor. Outside, somewhere in the dark streets of Alder Creek, Charles Ward was making plans for a wedding. Wyatt Bellamy was making different ones. The letter was done before midnight. Wyatt read it twice, changed 2 words, then folded it and sealed it with wax from the candle on the nightstand. He addressed it to a man named Garrett Cole, Deputy Land Commissioner, Billings Office, and he wrote 3 words across the bottom corner that only Garrett would understand, words from a night 6 years ago, when Wyatt had pulled him out of a river he hadn't intended to survive. Garrett Cole owed him a life. Wyatt had never called it in before. He figured this was the moment. He was up before sunrise. He found the livery boy awake and bribed him with $2 to ride the letter to the next town east and put it on the mail coach heading toward Billings. The boy was maybe 15, quick-eyed and hungry for coin, and Wyatt looked at him hard before handing over the envelope. You stop for no one, Wyatt said. Ward's men try to slow you down. You don't know what you're carrying. Understand? Yes, sir. And you don't tell anyone in this town you're going. Yes, sir. Good. He gave him an extra $1. Ride fast. The boy was gone before the sun cleared the eastern ridge. Wyatt went back to the boarding house, ate breakfast alone in the small dining room, and was on his second cup of coffee when Eva came downstairs. She'd slept. He could tell because her eyes were clearer and because there was a different kind of tension in her face now. Not the exhausted grief of the night before, but something sharper, decision-shaped. She sat across from him without being invited. Mrs. Holt's granddaughter, the 14-year-old who apparently had the ears of a barn cat, glanced at them from the kitchen doorway and then disappeared. "I sent the letter," Wyatt said quietly. Eva nodded. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I told Ward this morning that I woke up with a fever. His housekeeper came by to check on me." A pause. "She's a decent woman." She confirmed it to him without blinking. She knows enough." Eva looked at him steadily. "I need 2 days. I told Ward the Reverend won't perform a ceremony over a sick woman. It's bad luck, and Ward is surprisingly superstitious for a man with no soul." Something close to dark humor moved through her expression. He agreed to wait until Thursday. Thursday. That gave them 2 days. Wyatt had told Garrett 4. He ran the numbers in his head, and they didn't add up cleanly, but they rarely did. "I need to talk to your father," Wyatt said. Eva went very still. "Not about the deed," he said quickly, reading her face. "Not yet. I just need to understand what he knows, what Ward has told him, where the gaps are. If we're going to make a case to a federal judge, I need to know what your father will say when someone asks him." "My father," Eva said carefully, "is not a bad man. I know. He made a desperate choice, and someone took advantage of it. That's different from Eva." He kept his voice even. "I'm not going after your father. I'm going after Ward. But Ward built his whole arrangement on your father's belief in a lie. That lie is the case. I need to understand it from the inside." She was quiet for a long moment. Something worked through her face that he didn't try to read. "He's at the North Ridge property," she said finally. "He goes up there every morning to check on the cattle. Ward's men are on the south end of the property. They stay away from him during the day." She paused. "He doesn't know I'm here. He thinks I'm staying with Ward's housekeeper to prepare for the ceremony." Wyatt nodded. "Can you get me out there without Ward knowing?" "I can try." They left the boarding house separately. Eva went first, walking toward the dry goods store, the way a woman running an errand walks, unhurried, purposeful, visible. Wyatt went around the back of the building through the alley and met her at the edge of town, where the main road turned to trail. She had a horse, a brown mare that moved well and clearly knew her. Wyatt brought his own. They rode without talking for the first mile, and the silence between them was the kind that didn't need to be filled. Then Eva said without looking at him, "He's going to argue with you." "Most men do." "He's going to say the arrangement was his decision, and he stands by it. Let him. He's going to ask who you are and what business it is of yours." Wyatt glanced at her. "What do you want me to tell him?" She thought about it. The trail wound upward through timber, and the morning air was cool and sharp, carrying the smell of pine and something distant that might have been rain. "Tell him you're a man passing through who happened to read a contract," she said. "That's true enough." "It is," he agreed. They rode another half-mile before she spoke again. "He loves me," she said. Quiet, like she was reminding herself. "In his way he does. He's always thought of solutions in terms of what he has available to trade. And I was available." Wyatt didn't say anything. Sometimes the right response to a hard truth was just to let it land without softening it or arguing with it. "I'm not telling you that, so you'll feel sorry for me," she said. "I know. I'm telling you so you'll know not to make him feel like a villain in front of his own daughter. If you do, he'll dig in and we'll lose him." Wyatt nodded. "Understood." Daniel Storm was exactly what Wyatt had expected, and nothing like what he'd imagined. He was a compact man, thick-set with Eva's dark eyes, and a face that had once been strong and was now just tired. He was checking a fence line when they rode up, and he turned at the sound of hooves with the wariness of a man who had learned to be careful. When he saw Eva, something in his face broke open for just a second relief, and guilt mixed together in a proportion that told Wyatt everything he needed to know about Daniel Storm's inner life. Then he saw Wyatt, and the wariness came back. Eva. He didn't come toward her. "What are you doing up here?" Ward said. "Papa?" Her voice was gentle, carefully gentle. "This is Wyatt Bellamy. He rode into town yesterday. He has some questions about the papers you signed in January." The change in Daniel Storm's face was immediate and complete. Every muscle in it went tight. "What papers?" "The mortgage extension," Wyatt said. He stepped off his horse, moved slow hands visible. "Mr. Storm, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want to understand something. Who are you?" "A man who reads contracts." "Ward's man." "No, sir." Wyatt met his eyes. "Not Ward's man." Daniel Storm looked at his daughter. Something passed between them, a whole conversation that Wyatt wasn't part of and didn't try to enter. Then the older man set down his fencing tool and said, "What about the extension?" Wyatt pulled out the copies Eva had made. She'd been careful enough to copy the key sections by hand before returning the originals to the envelope she'd taken them from. He handed them to Daniel Storm without preamble. The man read. His face changed as he read, but slowly the way ice changes in early spring, not cracking, just softening in ways that showed the structure underneath was compromised. "This isn't an extension," he said finally. His voice was strange, flat, and airless. "No, sir." "This is a—" He stopped, started again. "This says I transferred the deed." "Yes, sir." "In January." He looked up. His eyes had gone somewhere far away. "Hendricks told me it was an extension. Ward's lawyer. He sat at my table and explained every line." "He explained what Ward wanted you to hear," Wyatt said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Wyatt had heard in a long time. Daniel Storm looked at his daughter. Eva had gone very still, and Wyatt could see her fighting with something, the anger of a woman who had been handed over, wrestling with the love of a daughter who didn't want to watch her father come apart. Love won. It usually did in Wyatt's experience, which was one of the few things that gave him any faith in people at all. "Papa," she said, and her voice was steady as a board. "It's all right." "It's not all right." His voice cracked on the last word. "Eva, I signed—" He couldn't finish it. "You were deceived," she said. "That's different from what you think it is. I gave you away over a piece of land I don't even own anymore." He said it like a man pressing on a wound to understand its depth. "My God." "Mr. Storm." Wyatt stepped in, not aggressive, just present. "There's a federal circuit judge out of Billings, land office. A deed signed under false pretense with the opposing party's lawyer as the only witness to the explanation given. That's fraud. Clear fraud. I've sent a message asking for someone to come." Daniel Storm looked at him. "You did that already. This morning." "You don't even know us." "No," Wyatt agreed. "But I know fraud when I read it." The older man was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at Eva and said, "The ceremony. Ward will—" "I've delayed it 2 days," Eva said. "That's what we have. 2 days isn't enough to—" "It might be," Wyatt said. "If we have your statement, your account of what Hendricks told you in January, what Ward told you the arrangement was written out and signed, that's evidence I can send ahead to move things faster." Daniel Storm looked at him with the eyes of a man who wanted to trust something and couldn't quite remember how. "You're asking me to put my name on a statement against Charles Ward," he said slowly. "Ward owns half this valley." "I know." "He's got men. He's got connections to the county sheriff." "I know that too. If this doesn't work—" "Mr. Storm." Wyatt's voice stayed level. If it doesn't work, you are going to lose the property and your daughter both. I'm offering you a chance at keeping one of them." He paused. "I know which one matters more." Daniel Storm looked at his daughter for a long time. Eva looked back at him and didn't say a word, and Wyatt thought that took more courage than anything else she'd done since he'd met her. "Give me the paper," Daniel Storm said. They were back in town by noon. The statement was written in Daniel Storm's hand, witnessed by Wyatt and carefully quietly by Mrs. Holt, who turned out to have opinions about Charles Ward that she'd been keeping to herself for 3 years and was relieved to finally have somewhere to put them. Wyatt sent the second letter on the afternoon mail coach with the statement folded inside. Then he went and bought a meal he wasn't hungry for and sat in the dining room of the boarding house and tried to do the math again. 2 days. Garrett Cole was a fast mover when he had reason to be, and the letter gave him reason. But fast in 1878 meant something different from what a man might want it to mean. He was still sitting there when the door to the dining room opened and one of Ward's men walked in. Not to eat. Wyatt could tell the difference. The man scanned the room until he found Wyatt, and then he crossed to the table and stood there with his thumbs hooked in his belt and his hat still on, which was its own kind of statement. "Mr. Ward wants a word," he said. Wyatt looked up at him. "Does he?" "Tonight. His office above the mill. 8 o'clock. "I'll consider it." The man looked at him with the steady blankness of someone who had been told not to take no for an answer, but had also been told not to make a scene. It was an uncomfortable position. Wyatt had put men in it before. "It wasn't really a request," the man said. "Most things aren't," Wyatt said pleasantly, "until you decide to treat them like one." He picked up his fork. "Tell Mr. Ward I'll be there." The man left. Wyatt ate the rest of his meal without tasting any of it, and thought about what Ward knew, or thought he knew, and how much of either was going to walk through that office door at 8 o'clock. He told Eva at 4 when she came downstairs. Her face didn't change much. "He's suspicious." "He's calculating," Wyatt said. "That's different. He doesn't know about the letter or your father's statement, but he knows I sat at your table yesterday and I'm still in town. He wants to figure out what I am." "What are you going to tell him?" "Enough truth to be believable," Wyatt said. "And nothing else." She studied him. "He's dangerous, Wyatt." "I know. Not in the way men are dangerous when they're angry, in the way they're dangerous when they're calm and they've already decided something." "I know that kind too," he said. "I've been that kind." She looked at him with something that might have been surprise, and he let her look, because he wasn't going to pretend to be a simpler man than he was just to make things easier. "I'll be careful," he said. "That's not the same as being safe." "No," he agreed. "It's not." Ward's office smelled like pipe tobacco and fresh lumber and the particular dry scent of money that has been handled often enough to lose its ink smell and acquire something else, something mineral and patient. Ward was behind a wide desk when Wyatt came in, and the 2 men from the saloon were stationed on either side of the room, and Ward gestured to the chair across from him with the ease of a man who had done this particular thing, summoned, arranged, waited many times before. "Mr. Bellamy?" He poured 2 glasses of whiskey without asking. "Sit down." Wyatt sat. "How long do you plan on staying in Alder Creek?" Ward asked. Conversational. Warm almost. "Hadn't decided," Wyatt said. "What brought you here originally?" "Passing through." "To where, north?" Ward smiled. He picked up his glass. "You're not a very forthcoming man." "I'm a private one," Wyatt said. "There's a difference." "Indeed." Ward drank, set the glass down with precision. "I'll be direct with you, Mr. Bellamy. I don't know what Eva Storm told you yesterday in that saloon. I don't know what kind of picture she painted of our arrangement. Women in difficult circumstances sometimes—" He paused, choosing his word, dramatize. "She seemed pretty level-headed to me," Wyatt said. "She's young, emotional. The prospect of marriage frightens some women, particularly those who haven't had another pause, guidance. Wyatt looked at him across the desk and kept his face as still water. "What is it you want from me, Mr. Ward?" The pleasantness in Ward's face thinned out just slightly. He hadn't expected the direct approach. "I want to know what your interest is in my future wife." "I sat at a table with a stranger and had a cup of coffee," Wyatt said. "That's the whole of it." "You're still here." "I like the town." "You don't like this town," Ward said softly. "Nobody passing through likes this town. It's a functional place. It's not likable." He leaned forward slightly. "I've made inquiries about you, Mr. Bellamy." Wyatt Bellamy, Montana. Territory former hired hand, former trail scout, spent 2 years working enforcement for a mining company up near Glacier. A man who does difficult jobs for people who need difficult things done. Wyatt kept his face still. "A man like that," Ward continued, "doesn't sit in a boarding house in Alder Creek for no reason. Someone hired him, or something's keeping him." He let that sit for a moment. Which is it? This was the moment. Wyatt had known it was coming, had walked through it several times in his head during the hours before 8 o'clock. He picked up his whiskey glass, the one Ward had poured without asking, and he drank from it slowly, and he set it back down. "Nobody hired me," he said. "Then something's keeping you." "A matter of business," Wyatt said. "Land business. Nothing to do with you or your wedding." Ward studied him. The 2 men on the sides of the room were very still. Wyatt was aware of both of them, the way you're aware of a fire, not looking at it directly, but knowing exactly where it is. "Land business," Ward repeated. "There's a property north of here I've been asked to assess. Grazing rights question. Takes a few days to ride the lines." Wyatt met his eyes. "That's it, Mr. Ward. That's the whole unexciting story." Ward looked at him for a long time. Long enough that Wyatt counted breaths without moving his chest any more than necessary. Then Ward sat back in his chair, and his whole posture eased, and Wyatt knew with the instinct of a man who had spent years reading rooms that he hadn't believed a word of it. "Well then," Ward said pleasantly, "I hope your business concludes quickly. Alder Creek can be an uncomfortable place for men who stay past their welcome." Wyatt stood. He put his hat on. He looked at Ward one last time, and he let something show in his face, not a threat, not exactly just the reminder that he was the kind of man who had been to uncomfortable places before and had generally been the one who left them walking. "Much obliged for the drink," he said. He walked out of the office and down the mill stairs and into the night air, and he didn't look back, and he didn't hurry, and he made it exactly to the end of the block before his jaw unclenched for the first time in 40 minutes. Ward didn't believe him, which meant tomorrow was going to move faster and harder than any of them had planned for. And the 2 days Eva had bought might have just become one. He was moving back toward the boarding house at a pace that wasn't quite a run when he heard the sound sharp one crack like a board breaking. From the direction of the north end of the building. He stopped. His hand went to his side. Mrs. Holt's granddaughter came sprinting around the corner of the alley and nearly ran directly into him, caught herself, grabbed his arm with both hands and said, "Mr. Bellamy, they took her." The world went very quiet. "Ward's men," the girl said, gasping. "2 of them came to the boarding house 20 minutes ago. Said Mr. Ward wanted Miss Storm to come stay at his house tonight, for the ceremony preparation." She pulled at his arm. She didn't want to go. She told them she was ill. They told her it wasn't. They said it wasn't a request. Wyatt was already moving. "Where?" he said. "Ward's house. East of town, the big one with the—" He was already gone. He didn't take his horse. No time. Ward's house was at the east end of town, close enough to run if a man was willing to move fast through dark streets and not care who saw him doing it. Wyatt was willing. He went around the back of the mill, cut through the gap between the feed store and the blacksmith's, and came up on Ward's property from the south side, where a low fence separated the yard from the open field beyond. He stopped at the fence and listened. 2 men outside the front entrance. He could hear them, the low murmur of conversation, the scratch of a boot on gravel. Around the back, nothing. a single lamp burning in a ground floor window. He went over the fence quietly. The back door was locked. He didn't waste time on it. The window beside it was latched, but the latch was old, and old latches had a particular weakness if you knew where to press. He knew where to press. The window gave without a sound. He was inside. The house was large by Alder Creek standards proper. Floorboards, plastered walls, the kind of furniture that came in by freight wagon at considerable expense. Ward had been making a point with this house since the day he'd built it. Look what I have. Look what I can take. Wyatt moved through the back hallway, with one hand on the wall, listening at every doorway. He heard Ward's voice first. Coming from the front room, low and smooth, the kind of voice that carries without needing to be raised. Then Eva's, shorter, clipped. He moved toward it. He stopped just outside the doorway, far enough to stay in shadow, close enough to hear everything. "You delayed my ceremony," Ward was saying. "I would have accepted that, Eva, if I believed you were genuinely unwell. But you're not unwell. You've been running around the countryside all morning with a stranger." "I went for a ride," Eva said. Steady. She was keeping it steady. "I'm allowed a ride." "You're not allowed anything I haven't agreed to." The warmth was entirely gone from his voice now. This was what was underneath all that smoothness, not anger exactly, but something colder, certainty. The certainty of a man who has never once been told no and made to live with it. "Who is Wyatt Bellamy?" "I told you. A man passing through." "You told me nothing. He told me land business. Both of those stories are lies." A pause. Something moved a chair, a glass set down. "I'm going to ask you one more time, Eva, and I want you to think carefully about what it costs everyone in your life if you choose to keep lying to me." Wyatt's jaw was so tight it ached. "He's a man passing through," Eva said again. Her voice didn't shake, not once. "I had coffee with him, that is all." Silence. "Your father came to see me today," Ward said, and that shifted something in the room. Wyatt felt it even through the wall. He seemed agitated, upset about something. "I asked him what was wrong and he said it was nothing. But Daniel Storm is not a man who hides things well." Another pause. "What did you tell him, Eva?" "Nothing." "You're lying again." "I'm not." "You went to the North Ridge this morning." His voice had gone quieter. That was the warning. Wyatt knew that particular dynamic men got louder when they were performing anger. They got quiet when the anger was real. "Henderson saw you right up there. You and Bellamy together." A silence that had weight and edges. "What were you doing at your father's property?" "It's not your property," Eva said. The words landed like a stone in still water. And then Wyatt heard something he hadn't expected: Ward's laugh. Low and short and genuinely amused. "Oh," Ward said softly. "So that's what this is." Wyatt didn't wait any longer. He stepped through the doorway. Ward was standing near the fireplace, glass in hand, exactly as composed as he'd been across the desk at the mill. Eva was on the far side of the room, and she turned the moment Wyatt appeared, and something moved through her face that she controlled in about half a second. Relief quickly locked back down into steadiness. Ward looked at Wyatt with something that was almost appreciation. "Well," he said. "That's an interesting way to enter a man's house." "Front door was occupied," Wyatt said. "I'll have to speak to my men." Ward didn't move from the fireplace. He held his glass with the ease of a man who was not surprised, which meant he had been expecting something. Maybe not this exactly, but something. "You have a talent for being where you're not wanted, Mr. Bellamy. I've been told." "Eva." Ward didn't look at her. "Go upstairs." "She's fine where she is," Wyatt said. Now Ward looked at him, and the pleasantness was gone entirely. And what was underneath it was worse. Not rage, not bluster, just a flat and absolute refusal to accept a world that wasn't arranged to his liking. "You're in my house," he said. "In my town. with 2 men outside that door and another 2 upstairs. He tilted his head slightly. Exactly what do you think you're accomplishing? I'm having a conversation, Wyatt said. One you probably should have had with a lawyer before you decided to commit federal land fraud. The word federal did what Wyatt had intended it to do. Something moved behind Ward's eyes fast there and gone, and it wasn't fear exactly, but it was the first cousin of it. That's a serious accusation, Ward said carefully. It's a documented one, Wyatt said. A deed transfer signed under false representation, witnessed only by your own attorney, who explained it to the signing party as a mortgage extension. That documentation is currently on its way to the Federal Land Office in Billings, along with a signed statement from the man who was deceived. The glass in Ward's hand didn't move. He was too controlled for that, but his knuckles went white around it. Daniel Storm, he said. He writes a clear hand, Wyatt said. Detailed. Remembers the exact words your lawyer used, the exact date, the time of day. He paused. He's an honest man. Juries tend to find honest men convincing. Ward was silent for 5 full seconds. Wyatt counted. You've made a significant mistake, Ward said finally. Made plenty of those, Wyatt agreed. This doesn't feel like one. You have no authority here, no badge, no legal standing. I don't need any. The federal judge coming down from Billings has all 3. Wyatt kept his voice flat and even. No heat in it. Heat was for men who weren't sure of their position. You can have your men throw me out of this house right now. That's your right. But those letters are already moving east, and the only thing that stops a federal inquiry is a federal decision, not a local one, and not you. The room was absolutely still. Eva hadn't moved. She was watching Ward the way you watch a cornered animal carefully, without turning her back. Ward set his glass down on the mantel, precisely. He straightened the cuffs of his jacket. He breathed in through his nose, slow and deliberate, and Wyatt watched him rebuild the composed exterior over whatever was happening underneath it, and thought, this is the most dangerous moment. Not when men explode, when they recalculate. Jared, Ward said. The door opened. One of his men from outside, big unhurried with the flat eyes of someone who does what he's told without investing in the reasons. Mr. Bellamy is leaving, Ward said. Jared looked at Wyatt. Wyatt looked at Ward. Eva comes with me. Eva, Ward said pleasantly, is a guest in my home. Eva, Wyatt said, walked in here under coercion. That's different. She's my fiancée. She's a free woman until she says otherwise, in front of a reverend. Wyatt took 1 step forward, just one, enough to change the geometry of the room. And given that the property arrangement that formed the basis of this engagement is currently under federal review for fraud, I'd say the whole engagement is on shaky legal ground. Ward looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Eva. Is this what you want? He asked her. His voice had gone very quiet. You want to throw away everything your father arranged, everything I've offered your family. Eva looked back at him, and Wyatt could see the decades' worth of answers she was deciding between the careful calculus of a woman who had been trained to minimize, to smooth, to accommodate. She went through all of that in about 3 seconds. Then she said, yes. 1 word. Clear as a bell struck in an empty church. Ward's jaw tightened. You understand what this means for your father. My father, Eva said, signed away his property in January. You already own the North Ridge. There's nothing left to threaten him with. She picked up her bag from the chair beside her. You've been holding an empty hand for 2 weeks, Mr. Ward. Wyatt had not known she was going to say that. He kept his face still, but something in his chest shifted in a way he didn't have a name for yet. Ward looked at her with something that was almost in a terrible way, admiration. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, he said. Most people are, she said. Jared, Wyatt said without looking away from Ward. Step aside. Jared looked at Ward. Ward held Wyatt's gaze for one more long moment, and then he made a small gesture with his hand. Almost nothing, just a slight opening of the fingers, and Jared moved back. Wyatt crossed to Eva. She fell into step beside him without being told. They walked through the doorway, down the back hall, out the window Wyatt had come through. The second man outside didn't stop them. Ward, it appeared, had decided on a different kind of war. That worried Wyatt more than a fight would have. They were halfway across the field, south of the house, when Eva said very quietly, "He's going to go after my father." "I know. Tonight, before anything legal can—" "I know." Wyatt was already thinking through it. "We need to get to the North Ridge before his men do. It's dark. Your mare knows the trail." She didn't argue. They went for the livery at a pace just short of running, and Eva had her horse saddled in the time it took Wyatt to saddle his, which told him she'd ridden fast in the dark before and wasn't frightened of it. They were out of town and moving north in under 10 minutes. The trail was harder in the dark. Wyatt pushed as fast as he dared, and Eva kept pace without complaint, riding low and close to her horse's neck, knowing the animal well enough to trust it. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say that the situation hadn't already said. They were a mile out when Eva pulled up short. "Rider," she said. Wyatt heard it a second later. Coming down from the north, moving fast. One horse. Moving too fast for a man doing nothing. He moved his horse to the side of the trail, blocking it, and put his hand on his rifle. The rider came around the bend and hauled up hard when the trail was suddenly filled with two horses and no way around them. It was Daniel Storm. He was in his work clothes, hat crooked, and his face in the thin moonlight was the face of a man who had made a decision and was moving before he could think his way out of it. "Papa." Eva pushed her horse forward. "What happened?" "Ward's man came," he said. He was breathing hard. "Henderson came up to the property an hour ago and told me Ward wanted a meeting tonight, something about the loan terms." He looked at Wyatt. "He didn't know I'd already been to see you this morning. He didn't know about the statement." His jaw was set. "I told him no." Wyatt looked at him. "You told Ward's man no." "I told him the meeting would have to wait until I'd spoken with my own lawyer." Daniel Storm met Wyatt's eyes steadily. "I don't have a lawyer, but Henderson didn't know that." Wyatt felt something that was almost like a smile. Almost. "Where's Henderson now?" "Rode back toward town. He wasn't happy." Storm looked at his daughter. "Eva, are you all right?" "Yes, Papa." "Ward had you at his house. I heard from Mrs. Holt's girl. I'm fine." She reached across and put her hand briefly on his arm. "We need to move. Can you come back into town with us tonight? I'm not leaving my property." "Papa, I'm not leaving." His voice was quiet and absolute. The voice of a man who had run out of things he was willing to give up. "If Ward's men come up here tonight, they'll find me on my own land with a rifle and a clear conscience. Let them explain that to a federal judge." Wyatt looked at him. The man had aged 10 years in one day, but there was something in the set of his shoulders that hadn't been there before, something that looked improbably like relief. The relief of a man who had stopped lying to himself. "Then we stay," Wyatt said. Eva turned to look at him. "Ward's going to move tonight," Wyatt said, "one way or another. If it's the property he moves on, better to have people on it. If it's the legal side—" He paused. "He's already too late for that." They went back to the North Ridge together. Daniel Storm's cabin was small and plain, and achingly lived in, the kind of place that held years of ordinary life in its walls, photographs and a woman's quilt, and children's heights, marked on a doorframe in pencil. Eva ran her hand along those marks when she walked past them. Wyatt saw her do it and looked away. They settled in to wait. An hour passed, then another. Daniel Storm made coffee, and they sat around the small table, and somewhere in the second hour, Eva fell asleep in the chair closest to the stove, and her father put a blanket over her shoulders without waking her. and neither he nor Wyatt said anything about it. Around 2 in the morning, Wyatt heard horses. Multiple. Coming from the south. He was on his feet before Daniel Storm could react, and he put his hand up, stay back, and moved to the window. 4 riders. Coming up the trail at a deliberate pace. Not Ward. His men. Wyatt picked up his rifle. "Mr. Storm, do you have a gun?" "Shotgun. Over the door." "Get it." He heard Eva wake behind him. She didn't ask what was happening. She moved to her father's side. Wyatt opened the cabin door and stepped out onto the small porch. He let them see him. Let them count one man standing there in the dark with a rifle, easy and settled, like he had nowhere else to be and nothing else to think about. The 4 riders pulled up 15 yards from the porch. The one in front was Jared. "Bellamy," Jared said. "Mr. Ward wants Storm to come with us." "Mr. Storm isn't going anywhere tonight," Wyatt said. "That's not up to you." "It's not up to you either," Wyatt said. "It's up to him." And he said no. Jared looked past him to the open cabin door where Daniel Storm was visible with the shotgun and Eva beside him. He looked back at Wyatt. "You're outnumbered," Jared said. "I've noticed that's often true," Wyatt said. "Hasn't changed much." A silence held between them. The horses shifted. The night was very quiet around all of it, the way Montana nights are quiet. Total uninterested, the silence of something vast that didn't care what small men decided to do in the dark. "This isn't finished," Jared said. "No," Wyatt agreed. "It'll be finished when the federal man gets here. You might want to mention that to Ward." Another pause. Wyatt stood exactly where he was and didn't move and didn't blink, and the 4 horses and 4 men looked at him and at the cabin behind him, and did the math that men always eventually do when the cost of a thing starts to outweigh the order that sent them. Jared turned his horse. The others followed. Wyatt stood on the porch and watched them go until the sound of hooves faded entirely. Then he let out a breath, one long, slow one, and let his rifle hand drop. Behind him, Daniel Storm said, "Are they gone?" "For now," Wyatt said. He heard Eva's exhale. It was the sound of a woman who had been holding her breath in the dark and could finally stop. He came back inside. The 3 of them stood in the small kitchen with their coffee going cold, and the lamp turned low, and nobody said anything for a moment, because some moments don't need words, they just need witnesses. Then Daniel Storm looked at Wyatt across the table and said in a voice that had gone rough around the edges, in a way that had nothing to do with the hour, "I owe you an accounting I don't know how to start." "You don't owe me anything," Wyatt said. "I gave my daughter away to pay a debt," the man said. "And a stranger rode into town and fixed what I should have fixed myself." His jaw worked. "That's a debt." "It's not," Wyatt said. He looked at Eva, who was looking at her coffee. "It's just what needed doing." The night settled around the 3 of them. Outside, the Montana summer dark held everything quiet and still. Inside, the lamp burned low, and the old clock on the shelf ticked through the hours. Wyatt didn't sleep. He sat by the window with his rifle across his knees and watched the trail south and thought about federal judges and mail coaches and the specific arithmetic of 2 days that might have become 1. Dawn came slow and gray and cool off the mountains, and with it the sound of a single horse moving up the trail from town. Wyatt was on his feet, his hand on the rifle, eyes on the trail. The rider came around the bend at a walk, not Ward's men, not Jared, not anyone he recognized. A young man in a dusty coat with a leather satchel over one shoulder and a federal land office badge on his breast pocket that caught the first gray light of morning. Behind Wyatt, Eva appeared in the doorway. The rider pulled up and called out, "I'm looking for a Wyatt Bellamy. Message from Deputy Commissioner Garrett Cole." Wyatt went completely still. One day. Garrett had moved in one day. He went down the porch steps to meet the rider, and the young man handed him a folded document with a wax seal, and Wyatt broke the seal and read it in the gray morning light, with his heart doing something it hadn't done in a long time. Something that felt against all reasonable expectation, like hope with teeth in it. He read it twice. Then he turned and looked at Eva. She was watching him from the doorway, arms folded against the morning cold, waiting. "He's coming personally," Wyatt said. "Garrett Cole. He'll be in Alder Creek by tomorrow morning with a territorial marshal and a cease and desist on all Ward's property transactions pending investigation." He held up the document. "The deed transfer is flagged as fraudulent pending review. The marriage arrangement is listed as legally void pending the investigation outcome." Eva looked at him. "It's not finished," he said. "But Ward can't touch your father's land. Not legally. Not while Cole is here." Her hands, he noticed, were not pressed flat against her sides the way they'd been in the saloon 2 days ago. They were hanging loose at her sides open. "Tomorrow morning," she said quietly. "Tomorrow morning." She looked at the document in his hand, and then she looked at him, and the look on her face was not relief. Not yet relief required believing the danger was over, and neither of them was that foolish. But it was something. The first real thing she'd let herself feel since he'd watched her cry alone in a saloon and decided to sit down. Behind her, Daniel Storm appeared in the doorway, took one look at Wyatt's face and said, "Tell me." Wyatt told him. The older man listened with his hands at his sides, and his eyes going bright in a way he didn't try to hide. And when Wyatt was done, Daniel Storm looked at his daughter for a long moment, and then looked away, out over the land that was still his, still here, still waiting. "Tomorrow," Daniel Storm said. "Tomorrow," Wyatt confirmed. The messenger was already riding back toward town, and somewhere down that same trail, Charles Ward was waking up to a morning that was about to become the worst day of his carefully constructed life. Because a man Wyatt Bellamy had once pulled out of a river had moved fast, and a woman who'd held herself together with 2 hands for longer than anyone should have to, had held on one more night. By the time the sun cleared the eastern ridge, Wyatt had already decided what he was going to do when this was finished. He hadn't sorted out all of it. But the part about the North Road to Billings, the part where he rode away alone, that part, had quietly, and without announcement, stopped being the plan. He wasn't sure exactly when it had stopped. He had a feeling Eva Storm could have told him the precise moment, down to the minute, if she'd been inclined to. He didn't ask her yet. There was still a day to get through first, and Charles Ward hadn't said his last word, and men like that never did. Ward moved before breakfast. Wyatt heard the horses coming up the north trail at first light, not 4 this time, more. He counted 6 by sound before he was fully off the floor, and he had his rifle up and was at the cabin door before Daniel Storm had gotten his boots on. "Stay inside," Wyatt said. "This is my land," Storm said. "It is. Stay inside anyway." Eva was already at the window. She didn't argue. She watched. The riders came up hard and fast and pulled to a stop in the yard, and this time it wasn't Jared in front. It was Ward himself. In his good coat, clean-shaved, sitting his horse like a man who had made a decision in the dark hours of the morning, and arrived on the other side of it, resolved. Behind him, 6 men. 2 of them Wyatt recognized from the mill. The others were harder faces, men brought in for a specific kind of work. Wyatt stepped off the porch. "Mr. Ward," he said, "you're a long way from your mill." Ward looked at him the way you look at an obstacle you've decided to go through rather than around. "I want Storm," he said. "He's violated the terms of the loan agreement. Under the terms of that contract, I'm entitled to seize the property immediately upon default." "The contract's under federal review," Wyatt said. "You know that. Your man read the same message I did." "My man read a letter from a bureaucrat in Billings," Ward said. "That letter carries no legal weight until a sitting judge issues an order. No judge has issued anything." He looked past Wyatt to the cabin. "Daniel, come out." The cabin door opened. Daniel Storm stepped out with his shotgun at his side, not raised, just present. His face was the particular gray of a man who hasn't slept and has run out of pretending. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Charles," he said. His voice was steady. Ward looked at him with something that might in another man have been regret. "Daniel, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You signed papers. Papers mean things. You lied to me about what I was signing. You signed them." Ward's voice didn't change. That was the terrible thing about him. He was always reasonable, always level. He'd constructed an entire life on the principle that whoever controlled the tone of a conversation controlled its outcome. Whatever Hendricks told you in explanation, the legal document is what it is. Courts don't adjudicate feelings, Daniel. They adjudicate signatures. "Then we'll let them adjudicate," Wyatt said. Ward turned back to him. "Step aside, Bellamy." "No." The word was simple and flat, and it landed in the yard like a dropped stone. One of Ward's men shifted in his saddle. Wyatt tracked it. "You have no standing here," Ward said. "I have a rifle and a clear view of the trail," Wyatt said. "That's standing enough." 6 men against 1. Ward spread his hands slightly, reasonable, regretful. "Be sensible." "What?" "Man I used to ride with said the same thing outside a mining camp in Glacier," Wyatt said. 11 men against 2. He paused. "He was wrong about the math." A silence held in the yard. Ward's horses shifted and blew. The morning light was coming in cold and flat off the eastern ridge, and everything in it looked very clear and very final. Then one of the men at the back said, "Boss?" Ward turned. Coming up the south trail, the other direction, the town direction, were 3 riders, moving at a purposeful pace, not running, not sneaking. The deliberate pace of men who had authority and knew it. The one in front was wearing a federal marshal's badge that caught the morning light from 50 yards away. Beside him, a compact man in a dark coat with a leather satchel across his chest. Garrett Cole, Deputy Land Commissioner, who had apparently decided to ride through the night rather than wait for morning in Billings. The third rider Wyatt didn't recognize, but the man was wearing a suit and carrying a document case, and men who rode to remote Montana properties at dawn carrying document cases were generally lawyers. Ward went very still on his horse. Wyatt said nothing. There was nothing that needed saying. Garrett Cole pulled up at the edge of the yard and took in the scene in about 2 seconds. Ward's 6 men. Wyatt standing between them and the cabin. Daniel Storm on the porch with a shotgun, and his expression didn't change at all, which was one of the things Wyatt had always respected about him. "Charles Ward," Cole said. He had a carrying voice, the kind built for rooms that needed to be quieted. "Deputy Land Commissioner Garrett Cole, Federal Land Office. This is Marshal Hendricks, no relation. A dry aside that nobody laughed at, and Mr. Terrence Webb, attorney, retained on behalf of the Land Office investigation." He looked at the assembled men. "I'm going to ask everyone to step down from their horses." Nobody moved for a moment. "That wasn't a suggestion," Cole said pleasantly. Ward dismounted. His men followed. Wyatt lowered his rifle. What followed was the most quietly dramatic 2 hours of Wyatt Bellamy's considerable experience with dramatic situations. Cole had arrived with paperwork that was apparently already further along than anyone in Alder Creek had anticipated, because Garrett Cole, when properly motivated by a letter from a man who'd once pulled him out of a river, did not do things halfway. The cease and desist covered all of Ward's property transactions in the valley going back 3 years. The document Webb produced was a preliminary injunction preventing any transfer of the Storm property pending investigation. A second document, which Cole read aloud in the yard, while Ward stood absolutely still with his jaw working, was a summons requiring Charles Ward, Elias Hendricks Ward's lawyer, and 2 named associates to appear before the federal circuit judge in Billings within 14 days. Ward said nothing through all of it. He stood and listened, and his face was the face of a man doing extremely rapid calculations. Then Cole looked at him and said, "Do you have anything to say, Mr. Ward?" Ward said, "I'll need to consult my attorney." You'll have the opportunity, Cole said. In Billings. Ward looked at Wyatt. Just once, direct and flat, and containing everything he wasn't saying. Then he turned and remounted his horse and rode back down the south trail without another word, and his men followed, and the yard was suddenly very quiet. Daniel Storm sat down on the porch steps. He sat down abruptly, like his legs had simply decided they'd done enough. He put his face in his hands and didn't make a sound, but his shoulders shook once hard and then went still. Eva came out of the cabin. She looked at Wyatt across the yard, and he looked back at her, and neither of them said anything, because the moment was too full of too many things for words to do much good in it. Cole crossed to Wyatt, and the two men stood side by side watching the south trail where Ward's riders had disappeared. "You look terrible," Cole said. "Didn't sleep," Wyatt said. "The letter was good. The old man's statement was better." Cole glanced at Eva, who was kneeling beside her father, with her hand on his back. "The girl figured this out herself." "Most of it," Wyatt said. "Smart." "Very." Cole clapped him once on the shoulder. "Come into town this afternoon. I need your formal statement before we ride for Billings tonight." Wyatt nodded. Cole went to talk to Webb. The marshal walked the perimeter of the property with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who documented things for a living. The morning got warmer. Somewhere up the ridge, a bird was making a considerable amount of noise about something. Wyatt went to the porch steps and sat down next to Daniel Storm. The older man had gotten himself back together, face-dry hands, steady on his knees. He looked out over his land still, his documented and protected, and no longer held by a lie, with the expression of a man who has looked directly at a thing he was afraid of, and found that seeing it was survivable. "I need to apologize to you," Storm said. "You don't," Wyatt said. "Not to you." He looked at Eva, who was standing a few feet away. "To her." His voice came out rough. "Eva," she turned. "I put you in a position no father has the right to put his daughter in," he said. He wasn't looking away. He held her gaze with the particular stubbornness of a man making himself do a hard thing correctly. "I told myself it was the only way, that Ward was a good man who'd take care of you. I told myself a lot of things that weren't true, because the truth was too much to sit with." A pause. "I'm sorry. For all of it." Eva looked at her father for a long moment. Something moved through her face that was old and complicated and not simple enough to be called forgiveness, but was moving in that direction with evident intention. She sat down on the step beside him and put her head on his shoulder, and he put his arm around her, and neither of them said anything else, and Wyatt stood up quietly and walked out to the fence line to give them the space they needed. He stood there a while, looking out at the valley below. The summer morning was fully committed now, warm and bright and indifferent to everything that had happened in the dark hours before it. Montana had that quality, it didn't carry events forward. Each morning was just a morning. He heard Eva's footsteps behind him and didn't turn until she was beside him. "Cole needs your statement this afternoon," she said. "I know." "And then he rides for Billings tonight." "Yes." A pause. The valley stretched out below them, green and wide, impossibly ordinary for what the last 2 days had been. "What happens to Ward?" she asked. "Investigation. Probably trial. A federal judge with a case this documented." Wyatt shook his head slightly. "Ward's smart enough to know when he's outgunned. He'll settle, offer restitution, accept terms, keep himself out of a cell if he can manage it." He looked at her. "Your father gets clear title on the North Ridge. The other families Ward pushed out, Cole mentioned there are 2 others they'll have grounds for their own claims. And Hendricks, the lawyer. Disbarred at minimum," Wyatt said. "Possibly tried alongside Ward." Eva was quiet, taking that in. "It's not enough," she said. Not bitterly, just honestly. "No," Wyatt agreed. "It never quite is." She nodded. She'd known that. She was the kind of woman who knew what the world was and didn't need it softened for her, which was one of the things about her that had been apparent from the first moment in the saloon and had not stopped being apparent since. "What about you?" she asked. She wasn't looking at him, watching the valley. "You had a job in Billings. You were passing through." "That was the plan," Wyatt said. "Plans don't last long in Alder Creek," she said. The same words she'd said to him 2 days ago in the saloon, but they meant something different now. She knew they did. He could hear it in the way she said them. He looked at her profile, the morning light on her face, the way she was standing, not pressed down, not held together by force, just standing. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what happens to this property. Your father's land. Once the title is clear." He paused. "North Ridge grazing land like that is good land. Better managed with 2 people than 1. Eva was very still. "I'm not a man who makes speeches," Wyatt said. "I'll tell you that up front." "I've noticed," she said. "I'm also not a man who has a lot to offer that's conventional." He looked at his hands on the fence rail. "I've got a horse and a rifle and a serviceable amount of experience with land and cattle and the particular kind of problems that tend to come with both." He met her eyes. "And I've got a strong opinion about the fact that you should not spend your life somewhere you didn't choose with someone who sees you as an asset." "That's a strange way to start something," she said. "I know. You've known me for 2 days. I know that too." She looked at him. The measuring look he'd come to recognize, quick, thorough, nothing wasted. "You're asking to stay," she said. "I'm saying I'd like to," he said, "if there's reason to." A silence. A real one. Not uncomfortable, not charged, just the silence of 2 people standing at the edge of something and being honest about what they were looking at. "I'm not—" She stopped. Started again. "I'm not easy to know," she said. "I'm told I'm difficult. That I have opinions that aren't asked for, and I state them anyway." "I've noticed that too," Wyatt said. "I haven't found it difficult." Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile. Close to it. "You're also told you're not forthcoming," she said. "Guilty," he said. "And you have a history in places that wanted you dead. Several. And you have no fixed address, no land, no." "Eva," he said. She stopped. "I know what I don't have," he said. "I'm asking if what I do have is worth something." She looked at him for a long moment. The morning turned around them warm and huge and unhurried. "Ask me again in a month," she said, "when you've seen what a Montana winter does to a man's plans." "Summer's barely started," he said. "I know." And this time she did smile, just slightly, just enough. "That's what I'm offering, the summer." "I'll take it," he said. They rode into town in the early afternoon, Eva, Wyatt, Daniel Storm, all 3 of them together on the South Trail, and the town watched them come, in the way small towns watch things from doorways, from windows, from the careful vantage points of people who want to see, without appearing to. Cole had set up in the Reverend's parlor, which had the advantage of being neutral ground, and the additional advantage of making Reverend Holt, who had been quietly complicit in Ward's arrangements for longer than was comfortable, visibly uneasy, which Cole seemed to find useful. Wyatt gave his statement. Daniel Storm gave his. Eva gave hers last, and she gave it sitting up straight, with her hands in her lap, and her voice even throughout. And when she got to the part about the saloon, about sitting there alone, while the whole town moved around her, and nobody stopped, she said it the same way she said everything else, without drama, without petition, as plain fact. Cole wrote it all down. Webb notarized. The marshal witnessed. When it was done, Cole folded the documents into his case and said, "I'll be back in Alder Creek within 30 days with the judge's preliminary findings. Until then, no one touches the Storm property. I've left that order with the marshal, who's staying through the week." He stood, looked at Wyatt. "You'll stay—" "For a while," Wyatt said. Cole looked at Eva, then back at Wyatt. Something moved in his expression that was almost amusement, but was too fond to be just that. "Good," he said simply. Ward's house was dark that evening. His men had cleared out by midday, quietly, efficiently, the way men clear out when they understand that the ground has shifted underneath their employer. Henderson, the man who'd ridden up to threaten Daniel Storm the night before, was seen loading a wagon east before noon. He didn't say goodbye to anyone, which was Wyatt thought probably the most self-aware decision the man had made in years. Ward himself was still in town. His light was on in the mill office. He hadn't run. Wyatt hadn't expected him to. Ward was many things, but he wasn't stupid enough to make it worse by fleeing. He'd fight it legally, precisely, expensively, and he might even win some of it. That was the truth of the thing. Justice moved slowly, and sometimes incompletely, and Ward had enough money to drag it out. But he was done in Alder Creek. A man could feel that in a town. When it happened, the particular shift of air, when people who had been carefully neutral started letting themselves have opinions out loud. Mrs. Holt said something pointed to the dry goods owner, who repeated it to the blacksmith, who had always had his own views about Ward's water rights, and was relieved to express them. By evening, 3 different men had stopped Daniel Storm on the street to shake his hand. Wyatt watched that happen from outside the boarding house and felt something settle in him that he hadn't known was unsettled. He was sitting on the front steps, with a cup of coffee he'd actually been meaning to drink, when Eva came out and sat beside him. Not across from him this time. Beside him. Close enough that he could have put his hand over hers, if he'd had the nerve, which he didn't yet but intended to work toward. "Town's talking," she said. "Towns always do." "Mrs. Holt told me that 3 families came to see my father this afternoon. People Ward had pressured over the years." She paused. "They want to know if they have cases, too." "Cole would say yes," Wyatt said, "if they've got documentation." "I told them that." She looked at her coffee. "My father's going to be busy." "He's going to be all right," Wyatt said. "I know." She said it quietly, like something she was still getting used to believing. "I know he is." The evening settled around them. Down the street, someone was playing a harmonica badly and enthusiastically, which was exactly the right kind of music for the end of a day like this one. The summer dark came in slow and soft, the way it did in Montana at that time of year, the sky going through 4 different colors before it finally committed to night. "I've been thinking," Eva said, "about what you said this morning. At the fence." Wyatt waited. "You said the North Ridgeland is better managed with 2 people," she said. "I did say that." "That's true," she said carefully. "From a practical standpoint, that's accurate." "It is." "My father is not a young man," she continued. "And the cattle don't care about legal proceedings." "No, they don't." "And someone is going to need to know the land well enough to work it through winter." She paused. "You said you had experience with cattle." "Fair amount," he said. "Trail work, too. And difficult terrain." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "So from a practical standpoint," she said, and there was something in her voice now careful and deliberate, the way she did everything. "It would make sense for a man with those skills to stay on through the season. Help get the property on solid footing." Another pause. "Practically speaking." Wyatt looked at her. The last of the evening light was on her face, and she was looking straight ahead down the street, not at him, which told him everything he needed to know about how much this was costing her to say, not because she didn't mean it, but because she did, and meaning things was not safe, and she had been unsafe enough recently to last a person a while. "Practically speaking," he said, "that makes a lot of sense." She nodded, still not looking at him. "Good." "Good," he agreed. A beat of silence. "Wyatt," she said. "Eva." She turned and looked at him, then directly the full weight of those dark eyes, and said, "Thank you for sitting down." 2 days ago, in a saloon, a stranger's table, a woman crying without hiding it. "Thank you for letting me," he said. And that was all for now, because some things didn't need to be pushed past their natural end, and both of them were people who understood that. The harmonica player down the street hit a note that was almost right. The summer dark finished arriving. The coffee went cold between their hands. Tomorrow, the marshal would finish his documentation and begin the work of serving Ward's summons. Tomorrow, Daniel Storm would start the process of reclaiming what had always been his. Tomorrow would have its own weight and its own complications, because that was the nature of tomorrows. But tonight was quiet. And tonight, for the first time in longer than either of them could exactly name, was enough. The marshal served Ward's summons on a Tuesday morning, and the whole town somehow knew about it before noon, without anyone being told directly which was the particular alchemy of small communities that Wyatt had never quite figured out, but had stopped being surprised by. He was at the North Ridge when it happened. He'd been up since before light working the fence line on the east pasture with Daniel Storm, and the two of them had fallen into a working rhythm that didn't require much conversation. The kind of rhythm that takes years to build between some men and arrives in days between others, which said something about Daniel Storm that Wyatt appreciated without naming out loud. They heard the news from Mrs. Holt's granddaughter, who rode up the trail on her family's old pony at a speed that suggested the information could not wait. "Marshall served him," she said, breathless. "Right outside the mill, in front of everybody." She was trying not to look too pleased about it, and failing completely. Ward took the paper and didn't say a word, just went inside. Daniel Storm leaned on his fence post and looked at the girl. "Anyone give him trouble about it?" "Nobody said a thing," she said. "That's the part. The whole street just watched. Nobody came to his side." She paused to let that land. Mr. Harding from the feed store actually nodded at the marshal when he rode off, like tipped his head. Wyatt went back to his fencing. Storm was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 6 months ago, Harding wouldn't have looked at anyone sideways who worked for Ward." "People follow strength," Wyatt said. "Ward looked weak the moment the federal badge showed up. Harding just adjusted." Storm was quiet again. "Working. You think that's all it is, strength?" Wyatt considered it honestly. "No," he said. "I think most people want to do the right thing. They just need somebody else to go first." He drove a staple into the post. "Your daughter went first. Everything else followed from that." Storm didn't answer, but his jaw moved in a way that meant something was working through him he wasn't going to put into words, which Wyatt respected. They finished the fence line by midday. Eva was at the cabin when they came back, sitting at the table with papers spread in front of her. Her father's financial records, the copies she'd made of Ward's documents, a ledger that looked like it had been gone over multiple times with careful attention. She had a pencil behind her ear and ink on her right hand, and she looked up when they came in with the expression of a woman who had found something. "Sit down," she said. They sat. "I've been going through all of it," she said. "Ward's loan terms, the payment records, what my father actually paid against the principal over 3 years. She turned the ledger toward them. "Papa, you paid back more than half the original loan." Storm looked at the numbers. "That can't be right," Hendricks always said. "Hendricks applied every payment to interest first," Eva said. "Every single payment. The principal barely moved because the interest rate was structured to outpace the payments. It's legal technically if the borrower signs the terms." She looked at her father steadily. "But you didn't sign those terms. You signed a standard loan agreement. Hendricks added the interest priority clause on a separate page that you weren't shown." The cabin was very quiet. "That's not just fraud on the deed," Wyatt said. "No," Eva said. "It's loan fraud. Separate from the deed transfer. Separate charge." She looked at him. "Cole needs to know this before he presents to the judge." Wyatt was already reaching for his hat. "I'll ride to town." "There's more," she said. He stopped. She pulled out another document. "I found this in the back of Papa's record box. A receipt. From 18 months ago when my father made a payment in person at Ward's office." She set it on the table. "It's signed by Ward, not Hendricks, Ward himself. And the amount recorded on this receipt doesn't match the amount recorded in Ward's ledger for the same date." Wyatt looked at it, then looked at her. "Ward has been skimming from his own loan operation," Eva said quietly, "recording lower payments from borrowers than what was actually received. The difference went somewhere else, not into the company books." "Personal accounts," Wyatt said. "That would be my guess." Daniel Storm looked at his daughter with the expression of a man who is realizing perhaps for the first time the full scope of what she was capable of, and feeling two things about it simultaneously. Pride so large it had nowhere to go, and a specific grinding guilt about how long it had taken him to look. "Eva," he said, "how did you find this?" "I've been looking at numbers my whole life, Papa," she said simply. "You just never asked me to look at these ones." Wyatt rode to town in under 20 minutes. Cole hadn't left yet. He was at the Reverend's parlor, still finishing documentation with Webb, when Wyatt came through the door and put Eva's papers on the table in front of him without preamble. Cole read. Webb read over his shoulder. The two men exchanged a look. "Where did she find this?" Cole asked. "Her father's record box," Wyatt said. "She went through everything, matched the receipts against the ledger entries line by line." "How long did that take her?" "She started this morning." Cole looked at Webb again. "This changes the scope of the case significantly," he said. "Personal embezzlement on top of deed fraud and loan misrepresentation. Ward's not settling this. This goes to full trial." "Good," Wyatt said. "It also means the judge may move faster on the preliminary findings. This kind of documented discrepancy." Cole tapped the receipt. "A judge sees this and he wants to move before Ward has time to get his finances in order." He looked at Wyatt. "Tell the girl she did well." "Tell her yourself," Wyatt said. "She'll want to hear it from someone with a badge." Cole did that afternoon riding up to the North Ridge with Webb and spending an hour going through Eva's documentation with a thoroughness that left no ambiguity. Eva answered every question directly without decoration, without minimizing, and Wyatt watched Cole's expression shift from professional courtesy to genuine respect over the course of that hour, which was satisfying in a way he didn't need to say out loud. When Cole left, he took the receipt and the ledger copies and the full analysis Eva had written out in her clear, precise hand. He told them the judge's preliminary findings would come within 3 weeks, not 30 days. He told Daniel Storm that he had in his estimation an extremely strong case for full restitution of payments made under fraudulent terms. He shook Eva's hand like he was shaking the hand of a colleague. After he rode away, Daniel Storm went around the back of the cabin on the pretense of checking on the horses and didn't come back for 10 minutes. When he did come back, his eyes were dry and his jaw was set, and nobody said anything about the 10 minutes. That night, for the first time since Wyatt had arrived in Alder Creek, all three of them ate a meal together at the North Ridge table, without anything pressing in from outside. It was a plain meal. Eva had made biscuits from a recipe so familiar she moved through it without thinking, and Storm had produced a bottle of something that had been in the back of a cabinet for a special occasion that had kept not arriving. They ate and drank, and the conversation was quiet and ordinary, in the particular way that ordinary things become extraordinary after they've been taken from you and given back. Storm asked Wyatt where he'd learned to read a contract. Wyatt told him about the mining company, about the years of watching men sign things they didn't understand, and the slow-building anger of seeing it happen over and over, until he'd taught himself to understand what he was looking at. Storm asked where he was from originally. Wyatt told him. A small spread in eastern Montana, parents gone by the time he was 16, a series of decisions that had taken him further and further from anything that looked like a home base. Until home base had stopped being a place and become more of a concept he'd stopped expecting to find. Storm looked at him across the table for a moment. Then he looked at his daughter. Then he looked back at Wyatt and said, "North Ridge runs about 800 acres in total. More than one man can work alone." Wyatt said, "I know." "I'm not as young as I was," Storm said. "Nobody is," Wyatt said. "I could use a man who knows cattle and land and how to read a contract when someone tries to put something past him." Wyatt looked at Eva. She was looking at her biscuit with great attention. "That sounds like a job offer," Wyatt said. "It sounds like whatever you want it to sound like," Storm said and picked up his drink. Eva looked up then. Her eyes met Wyatt's. She had the expression she always wore when she was making herself hold something back, not hiding it exactly, just measuring how much of it was safe to let out into the room. He decided to help her with that. "I'm inclined to accept," Wyatt said. He said it to Storm, but he was looking at Eva. "If all parties are in agreement." The look on Eva's face did something complicated, and then resolved into something quieter and more certain than a smile, and she said, "All parties are in agreement," and went back to her biscuit. Daniel Storm poured another round into all 3 glasses and said nothing, which was, Wyatt had come to understand how the man expressed the things that mattered most. 12 days later, Cole's preliminary findings arrived by courier. Ward was formally charged with deed transfer fraud, loan misrepresentation, and embezzlement of borrower payments. His property transactions in the valley were frozen pending trial. Hendricks had already surrendered his bar license and was cooperating with the investigation. Which was not a surprise. Men like Hendricks cooperated the moment the alternative became clear. 2 other families in the valley received formal notice that their cases were being reviewed for similar fraud. The North Ridge property was confirmed in writing in the clear, unambiguous language of a federal land office document as belonging to Daniel Storm, unencumbered with all prior transfers, declared void. Eva read that part aloud. She read it standing at the kitchen table with the paper in both hands and her father sitting across from her. And she read it once, and then read it again. And her voice was steady all the way through, and Wyatt stood in the doorway and thought that steady was the bravest thing a person could be. Ward left Alder Creek 3 days after the findings came through. He didn't announce it. He didn't stage a departure. He simply wasn't there one morning, his house locked, his horses gone, a note posted on the mill door directing business inquiries to his attorney in Helena. The men who'd worked for him scattered in the way that men scatter from a sinking thing, quickly, quietly, with minimal looking back. The town absorbed his absence, the way small towns absorb such things, a few days of intense discussion, a gradual settling, and then the particular forward momentum of people who have other things to attend to and lives to get on with. The Reverend, for his part, came to see Daniel Storm personally to apologize. Storm listened to all of it, thanked him for coming, and didn't make it easy for him, which Wyatt thought was exactly right. And then summer got back to being summer. Wyatt had never been on the working end of a cattle operation for longer than a season before. He'd always moved on before it could become something he had a stake in. Moving on was a skill he'd cultivated carefully over many years, and he was good at it, and it had served him in the way that things serve you when you've learned them out of necessity rather than preference. He found as the weeks passed that he was not moving on. He found that he had opinions about the north fence that weren't going anywhere, and a preferred method for rotating the east pasture, and a specific irritation with the hinge on the barn door that he kept meaning to fix, and kept finding good reasons to do properly rather than quickly. These were the opinions of a man with a stake. He noticed that. He didn't fight it. He and Eva did not talk about what they were, because talking about it directly was not either of their natural modes. Instead, they talked about cattle yields, and fence posts, and the price of feed in Billings, and whether the North Creek would hold through August. And somewhere inside all of that practical conversation was the other conversation running underneath like water under rock, present and moving even when you couldn't see it. On a Thursday evening in late July, coming down from the high pasture where he'd been checking on the summer grazing, Wyatt found Eva sitting on the fence at the bottom of the south field. She was watching the last of the light go off the mountains, and she had her hat in her hands, and her hair was down, and she looked like a woman who had been sitting somewhere, thinking for long enough that she'd arrived at the end of the thinking, and was now sitting with whatever she'd found. He stopped his horse, got down, tied it to the post, and sat on the fence beside her. She said, "Cole sent another letter today." About the trial? Ward's plea negotiations have started. Cole thinks it won't go to full trial. Ward will take a settlement restitution to the affected families, a fine surrender of the mill, and the properties he acquired through fraud. She paused. He keeps his freedom. Wyatt was quiet. "I'm angry about that," she said. "I want to be honest." "You should be angry about it. He put my father in debt with forged terms. He tried to buy me like a piece of land. He had men ride up to this property in the dark." Her voice was still level, but it had weight under it. "He should have to answer for more than a settlement." "He should," Wyatt said. "And the fact that he doesn't is a real thing, and it's worth being angry about." He looked at her. "But your father has his land. The other families have their cases. Hendricks is done practicing law anywhere in the territory." He paused. "Ward is gone from this valley. He's not coming back to a place where everybody knows what he is. That's something." "It's not enough," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not. It rarely is." He looked out at the mountains. "But your father is going to spend the rest of his life on land nobody can take from him. And you—" He stopped. "And me," she said. Not a question. An opening. "And you," he said carefully, "are sitting on a fence on land that belongs to your family after 2 days of the hardest kind of living, and you figured out the case that took down a man an entire county was afraid of, by going through a record box with a pencil." He looked at her. "That's also something." She was quiet for a moment. "You're not bad at talking," she said, "for a man who claims he doesn't make speeches. Don't tell anyone." She almost smiled. Almost. Then she said, "Wyatt." "Eva." "I said ask me again in a month," she said, "when you'd seen what Montana does to a man's plans." He remembered. Clearly. "You did." "It's been 5 weeks." He looked at her. "It has." "So." She met his eyes, direct as always. No wasted motion. "Ask me." He turned on the fence to face her. The evening light was going gold around them, and the mountains were doing what Montana mountains do in July, holding the last of the warmth in the rock, so the air stayed soft longer than you expected. "Eva Storm," he said. "I came to Alder Creek passing through. I had a job in Billings and a road north, and not one single reason to stay." He held her gaze. "I want to stop passing through. I want to have a reason to stay. I want that reason to be you." He paused. "That's the whole speech." She looked at him for a long moment. He let her look. He'd learned in 5 weeks that Eva Storm made decisions the way she did everything else thoroughly, without performing the process, and without changing them once they were made. "Yes," she said. One word. The same clarity she'd used when Ward had asked her what she wanted, and she'd said yes to leaving. Except this time, she was saying yes to something she was choosing entirely, with no one's hand on her shoulder. He put his hand over hers on the fence rail. She turned her hand over and held on, and they sat there together, while the light finished going off the mountains, and the summer dark came in warm and soft, and neither of them felt the need to add anything else to what had just been said. 3 weeks after that, Garrett Cole returned to Alder Creek with the settlement documents. He met with the affected families, with the marshal, with the reverend, who was trying to rebuild some credibility, and finally late on a Friday afternoon with Daniel Storm at the North Ridge table. The settlement was formal and binding. Ward's restitution covered the fraudulent loan overpayments in full, with additional payment for damages. The North Ridge title was recorded and sealed at the Federal Land Office in Billings. Cole had brought a copy for Storm to keep, which Storm took with both hands and set on the table and looked at for a long moment without speaking. Cole shook Storm's hand, then he shook Eva's, then he shook Wyatt's and held it a beat longer than necessary. "You did a good thing," Cole said quietly. She did the good thing, Wyatt said. I just sat at a table. Cole looked at Eva. He says that like it's nothing. I know, Eva said. He does that. Cole left with the marshal that evening, heading back east. The sun was low and the road was long, and the two men were silhouettes against the summer sky until they weren't anymore, and the valley went quiet around their leaving. Daniel Storm went inside. Wyatt and Eva stood in the yard, and the evening was warm, and the land was theirs, all of it, clearly, permanently, without condition, and there was no urgency pressing in from anywhere, no timer running, no one coming down the trail who needed to be watched. She put her hand through his arm. Not dramatic. Not a gesture for anyone to see. Just the simple motion of a woman standing next to someone she'd decided to stand next to, done the way she did everything, without announcement, without apology, completely. He covered her hand with his. They'd have a hard winter ahead, and cattle that needed working, and a fence on the east pasture that wasn't going to fix itself, and a community still sorting itself out after years of one man's quiet damage. They'd have mornings where the work was heavy, and evenings where there wasn't much left of either of them, and all the ordinary difficulty of a life built in a hard place. But the North Ridge was theirs. The title was sealed. The man who had tried to take it was gone from the valley and wouldn't be coming back. And Eva Storm, who had once sat alone in a saloon holding herself together with her two hands while a whole town moved around her and nobody stopped, was standing in her own yard on her own land next to a man who had turned left instead of right, and she was not holding herself together anymore. She was just standing. And that, in the end, was everything.